Well. It's been a long time, boys, girls, everyone join in. Welcome in. This is the Daily Wolves Courtside. We are coming to you live, streaming everywhere right now. Kevin Durant, Matt, he's finally moved. We finally have the KD news. I don't know about you, man, but I was tired. I was tired of hearing Kevin
Yeah.
Durant here. This is where he wants to go. This is where he doesn't want to go. Things changing, all these offers, the smoke screens. I'm glad it's finally over. How you feeling now that we don't have to talk about Kevin Durant forever going on, coming up here?
Dude, I'm juiced about it, honestly. Like, it was always something that was easy to talk about
Mhm.
just because it's a big name. It's an NBA legend. Like, excuse me, but obviously you wouldn't want to give away what Phoenix was asking for
Yeah.
Kevin Durant, but it would still be so cool to watch a year, 2 years of Kevin Durant on Minnesota. Like, I don't care who you are. That would have been cool, but I'm happy we're past it. I'm happy it's done. Sucks that he went to Houston. I think that definitely puts Houston in contention odds.
Yeah.
Had some playoff experience last year. I think people forget Fred VanVleet was hurt down the back end of the regular season. I think if Freddie didn't get hurt, that the Rockets very well could have taken down the Warriors possibly in 7 games. So when you add the scorer like Kevin Durant, that was the one thing that the Rockets were missing. So, and then you lose Jalen Green. Sure, you lose Dylan Brooks, but all in all, it was a good move for the Rockets. Sure, they gave up a lot, but people are acting like Kevin Durant is, I don't know, like washed or something. Kevin Durant is not washed, dude. He was scored what, 26 points a game, 8
Yeah.
boards, like 4 assists. Kevin Durant is far from washed. So it does stink that he went to Houston, but like you said, I'm happy we're done with it. I'm happy it's over.
Yeah, I'm happy it's over as well. Thanks for everyone coming into the show right now. We got things planned for the show. We're obviously talking a little bit of KD stuff first. Then we're going to be moving into what we think Minnesota will pivot to now that Kevin Durant has been moved. And then, of course, we got some NBA draft stuff. The NBA draft is coming up on Wednesday. We're going to be covering it leading up to the draft. Anything happens, moves, you name it. Even NBA draft night, we got you covered with the Daily Wolves. So follow us closely here. But yeah, man, Kevin Durant, like you said, he's not washed by any means. It would have been fun to have him here. It would have been fun. But at the end of the day, Minnesota just wasn't going to depart with guys like Jaden McDaniels, guys that they saw as the future. This stuff about Terrence Shannon Jr. being thrown into trades, that is not true from what people have also said. He was not mentioned in there. I'm not even sure if they offered Rob, but if they did offer Rob, I think they were more willing to part with Rob Dillingham than they were Terrence Shannon Jr. It probably would have taken one of those young guys, which would have been tough too.
For
So
sure.
if you do pivot, you go the route that had been mentioned with Rudy Gobert. You go the route with maybe Dante, Rudy, and like let's say Rob. It's hard, man. Are you willing to give up on Rob Dillingham so soon? I think Minnesota, they might not have been, and that's the thing. He was the 8th pick in the draft. They invested a lot. They traded up multiple first-round picks in the future to go get him. And this year, you're going to see Rob Dillingham, the shift of the focus into the NBA Summer League to see what Rob could do. Now, they could make a move, right? They could obviously still move him in some type of a deal for a player, but I think they want Rob Dillingham to kind of learn, just see what they have there. He's just too young of a player with a higher upside. And again, for what they paid to get him, just don't think they give up on, a guy like Rob. So I feel like Minnesota had an offer out there. It was probably lower than what was always reported. And I think Tim just held firm, guys. I think he just held firm on his offer. I believe it was out there, but
For sure.
it was just one of those things where we're not going to make the move. We're not going to all give up our future and go all in on Kevin Durant. We also, the reports coming out, KD didn't want to be in Minnesota necessarily. Why would you trade a bunch to get that? And I think, man, Minnesota would have been okay with taking him on a 1-year rental to see if it worked out here, to see if he ended up liking it. But again, KD was probably looking for a contract extension. I'm sure Houston news will come out later that he will sign an extension with the Rockets, or maybe that was agreed upon in the back. I'm not sure if Tim and Minnesota were willing to give Kevin Durant an extension off the rip when he came to Minnesota. And maybe that's where the KD not wanting to come here, maybe that's what Kevin was looking for, that security, man. What do you think about that?
I think that is pretty spot on for the most part. You kind of saw that. I think there was a report that was probably came out like 3 weeks ago. And it was like you said, that wherever Kevin Durant wants to sign, he wants to sign the max. So it's pretty clear that Kevin Durant's not going to be taking a pay cut anytime soon. And my big thing with this whole Kevin Durant trade news, his name getting floated around with Minnesota since the trade deadline last season, was that you can't give up a ton of young players, right? Because if you're going to give up your young players, like you said, you're going to give up your future, right? And when you have a player like Anthony Edwards who's going to enter his prime soon, you need money, you need flexibility. And Kevin Durant's old, dude. Like, I know that I just said he's not washed by any means, but he's going to be another one of those guys that could be an anomaly, like LeBron. You don't see players continue to average 25, upwards of 25 points a game at that high of efficiency, almost playing at a 50, 40, 90 level, continue that up into their 38s, 39s, and even 40s. So I think that's kind of right then and there when the Wolves were probably out on Kevin Durant. I don't obviously have a ton of insider knowledge on it, but that would be my guess, is that once you hear you're going to be paying a 38, 39-year-old freaking upward $60 million, it's not worth it. Not worth it in the slightest. So my question for you, Evan, is now that we kind of are past the Kevin Durant stuff, do you think that what do you think Minnesota does? Do you think that we kind of run it back to a similar team from last year? Do you think that we go out and get another player that maybe Tim Connelly hasn't been talking about, or the media hasn't been talking about? Like, I don't know, like a Trae Young or a DeJounte Murray. I wouldn't want that, but just a name to throw out there. Is there like a position of need, like a point guard or maybe a wing? Like, what are you looking at for Minnesota to do going into next season? Do you think they're going to hold firm and kind of run it back, draft whoever at 17, maybe trade the pick? Do you think we're going to go out and get somebody else? What's your take?
So Minnesota, they have 2 picks in the upcoming NBA draft, 31, 17. That kind of leads into what they're going to be doing. I just think when you have the roster the Timberwolves have, it's an expensive roster. You're going to need obviously some cheap contracts, but you can't have too many guys. You can't have too many contracts. You can't have too many guys on the roster. And yes, Nikhil's leaving most likely. But you can't really necessarily afford to bring in multiple players. If that's just what, like, my gut, this is not like what I've been told or anything. It's just how I feel. That's why I believe one of the picks, whether it's 31 or 17, is going to be moved. I feel like Minnesota, if they were to bring somebody in, they can only probably bring in one of those players. And that's why I think, one of the picks probably gets traded. It could be simple as trading 31 for a future first round pick. It could be moving 17 and moving that for a future pick, and then drafting at 31, or packaging it together and picking somewhere, moving up if you really like a player, or vice versa. You can move back even from pick 17 if Tim feels confident on something. I just think they're going to move one of the one of the picks. I think, my gut tells me Minnesota's going to go after a ball handler, Matt. That's what I would think. I think, Rob showed flashes, but I think he has a lot that is concerning. And I think the Timberwolves feel that there's a concerning factor there with Rob Dillingham. I don't know if they're not out on him, but I just think they want somebody. You're losing a ball handler, most likely again, in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And they just want somebody who can come in who's probably not a rookie. So it's probably not via the draft, and that could come in and hold down the fort in case a Mike Conley gets hurt. I think that's what the Wolves are looking at. Yes, they're probably going to look at higher options as well. Like you said, maybe big game hunting, like a Trae Young or someone like that. I don't think they end up going that route. I think it's more on the marginal trade route, or marginal player, or maybe a player that could start. But definitely a solid player who can come in, not turn the ball over, handle it, take the pressure off of Anthony Edwards a bit, give the Timberwolves some security with Mike Conley, who is going to be even older this year. He's going to turn 38, guys. And we saw Mike Conley's performances. Yeah, Father Time's catching up. He was dipping last year. I think he's a phenomenal player, but his minutes at this rate, he's a 20-minute a night kind of guy. And I think it's just because of his age. And, Mike, you just never know when like an injury can happen, and your odds of are probably increasing when you're of the age that, Mike Conley is. So I think Minnesota's going to go out. I think they want a ball handler. And now that the Kevin Durant domino's fallen, that's what my gut tells me they're going to go after, Matt.
I gotcha. I definitely agree with the ball handler thing. My big thing that I was actually just thinking of here while you were talking, we were kind of talking off stream. We talk about it in the group chat from time to time. The trades that Tim
Dude.
Conley makes, we don't expect. You've put it out on Twitter.
Yep.
I've talked about it with Andrew. I've talked about it with you. I've talked about it with everybody on our team, right? So that being said, we didn't expect the Rudy trade, or maybe like it was flirted, but nobody was like, the Wolves are going to give up this much for Rudy Gobert. Nobody really thought that we were going to trade Cat after going to the Western Conference Finals. I personally thought we were going to eat the tax and run it back. But with that being said, going into ball handler, the Boston Celtics are in a very, very funky situation with being a very expensive team. You have two players that are, I think, starting their $300 million contracts this year in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum.
Yep.
And I'm a very firm believer in when your two best players have been together for as long as they have, you're not going to split them up. That's the core of your team. And I know that players like Derek White, like Kristaps, are the players that take to win championships.
100%.
Right? And I see this comment right here from Dakota that says Boston is going to need a power forward with Tatum out, Julius for Drew. I would actually go a different route. I don't necessarily think it's going to be Julius Randle. I don't necessarily know who Minnesota would give up. But I don't think that Tim Conley would trade for Drew Holiday just because we have an aging point guard in Mike Conley, and Drew Holiday is kind of on the back end of his career. We kind of saw it last year. His offensive production started to dip off. I don't think Drew Holiday would necessarily be a ton better than Mike Conley would. You guys can call me crazy if you want, but just with how the offenses ran, I don't think that Drew Holiday does a ton more than Mike Conley does. So the route I'm going to pivot to is, what if somehow the Wolves can pull off a package for Derek White? Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, I don't realistically think it's going to happen, but getting Derek White would be so cool. Derek White just kind of seems like a Dante DiVincenzo level player, but I would even take it as to be a step up, because Derek White 2 years ago, he's a role player, right? But now Derek White is in that weird spot where he's not a role player, but he's not a star, but he is for sure a difference maker. And like, I don't necessarily know how to categorize it, but with Derek White, you get shooting, you get defense, you get the whole package with Derek White. So I think that that's definitely something to look at. Two other names that come to mind, both from the same team, actually, in the Chicago Bulls. You guys have seen it. His name's been floated around our team. Lonzo Ball, possibly. He's on a pretty team-friendly contract. He just signed a 2-year, $20 million deal in February, with the last year of his contract being a player option. So that's an expendable contract. Say you want to roll the dice on Lonzo. If you don't like it, you can let him go. You can trade him. That is a tradable contract, since there's a team option at the end of that. But right here, just like Cole said, Coby White. This is the guy that I would go after. Coby White's on a 3-year, $39 million deal. I'll pull it up right here. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the summer of 2026. So that means we could get a year of Coby White. And I think that Coby White most definitely has a higher ceiling than Lonzo Ball does, just because Lonzo Ball
100%.
is injury prone. And sure, Lonzo Ball doesn't turn the ball over as much as Coby White, but Coby White, it's kind of similar to the Derek White, Drew Holiday situation. Obviously, like, Coby White and Lonzo Ball, they're not as far in age as Derek White and Drew Holiday, but Coby White's going to give you more. Coby White has a higher ceiling, I feel like, offensively. And now I know Lonzo might be a better playmaker, but I still do firmly believe that your point guard has to have a pretty solid, reliable jumper in today's NBA. So that's another name that I would think of, is definitely Coby White. And last but not least, it'd be really cool to see one of your former, I don't know if classmates, schoolmates, but Tyus Jones.
Okay,
Tyus Jones back to Minnesota. Minnesota loves the dude. I wanted Tyus Jones when we traded for Monte Morris. So this is some dude that's just been on my radar. Maybe this is bias. Maybe this is just me reminiscing when we drafted Tyus, but just another one of those low turnover guards, sees the floor really well, has a good IQ, and he has a reliable jumper, if you must. I haven't watched a ton of Tyus Jones over the last year, but from what I've seen and what I remember, Tyus Jones is more than serviceable. So those are the names that come to my mind initially when you're talking about point guard.
Yeah, I like those names, man. I love I love your Kobe White analysis because Kobe White's so exciting. Somebody that I thought Minnesota was potentially going to go get in the draft, and they drafted Jarrett Culver in that draft. For those who don't remember it, Darius Garland, another guy who's in there that you didn't mention, that was in that same draft class with those guys. But Kobe White's an explosive scorer. He can drive in. He can do a lot of things Minnesota was missing. You have him for that year. He's still relatively young. I like Kobe White for sure. Derek White, he's my favorite out of everybody that we could get. Boston's going to do something. It's going to be Drew. Sure. It's going to be Porzingis, or it's going to be Derek White. It's going to be one of those guys that's coming out of Boston. They absolutely will make a deal 100%. You can quote me on that. You can record this and
clip it.
Get me on there. Clip it if you want to. Boston is going to get rid of a player. The second apron is going to destroy the Boston Celtics. They cannot stay in it. They have to free up some type of salary, man. But Derek White's my guy, 16 points a game last year, 4.5 rebounds, 4.8 assists. But I just think Derek White has this like dog in him. We call him the ball Jesus, me and my boys. I just think I think he's out there, man. I just think D White, he's a dog. He's an all defensive type of player. He fits the mold of Minnesota. He does everything you'd want, brings that defense, that playmaking ability. He can hit the three ball at a super high clip. And I think he's big time in big moments. And he's a winning player. He's won multiple championships. That experience he can bring in to the Minnesota Timberwolves if he ended up coming here. And then obviously he's familiar with Anthony Edwards. They played together for Team USA. So that's something to not be overlooked as well. I just think Derek White does everything. He's a floor raiser with a little bit of a ceiling untapped. Not the biggest, but I just think sometimes the marginal move is the big move. It's not always the home run superstar player, right? He reminds me of kind of when the Boston Celtics traded for Drew Holiday in the beginning. And then it kind of, you know what I mean? It took them to that level. It's kind of that
like player, maybe right? The Magic trading for Bane this year too. You get that solidified third option. They were missing the shooting, and everyone's like, "What the hell? You overpay." But it's the same situation for us with Rudy. You go, "Oh shit, it's an overpay," but in the long term, it works out.
No, I like him, man. He's in the prime of his career too. So I think D White, I think he would be awesome, man. I think, and then, Lonzo Ball, that's somebody that I would definitely take a flyer on if I was the Timberwolves too. Let's say you're not going big game hunting, but you want something more chill, gives you flexibility in the future. Yes, we haven't seen Lonzo Ball basically play in 2 years because of injuries. That is concerning. And that's why I think the trade, there's not a lot of risk to it because you're getting him on a, $10 million per year. That's chump change when the NBA salary is rising, when all this money is going to be around. 10 million is absolutely nothing in the NBA. So if it doesn't work out, okay, it's whatever. There's a team option on his contract. So in the second year, if you don't want him, you can let him go. It frees that room, but it gives you a little bit of security. And between Lonzo and Mike, you can spread out. I think Lonzo's a guy who's not going to turn it over. He's going to come in. He's a veteran. And if he hits, then you have him for another year. And it's such a cheap contract that if Lonzo were to hit or even be average serviceable, if he can stay healthy, I should say, I think that alone makes it valuable to have him for both years on a $10 million deal. There's not a lot of risk, man. And it gives you, again, flexibility to do things financially around Lonzo Ball. So I just think if you go that route, it's a win-win for the Timberwolves either way, even if Lonzo ends up getting hurt in the first 20 games. Okay, so be it. He's not going to cost a lot to get on the trade market either. I think like a sign and trade with Nickeil Alexander-Walker could land you like Lonzo Ball. Maybe you throw in a couple second-round picks, or maybe it's just pick 31 in the draft for Lonzo Ball. Like, okay, let's take a flyer on him. I don't think he's really going to cost a lot, man. And then, if you decide you want to move on from Gobert, people have been pointing out in the chat, Gobert has fans in Chicago, the Bulls. They like Rudy Gobert. I don't know if you could do something there, but facilitate something if you don't believe in him. I think Minnesota wants to keep Rudy, so I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, man, it's curious to see. Darius Garland, I think he was a big one. You didn't mention. I think they were really eyeing Darius Garland, but that injury is concerning, Matt. I don't know if I would be willing to go for a Darius Garland. He's coming back from an injury, and I'm pretty sure the Cavaliers would want Jaden McDaniels, and I would be unwilling to part with Jaden. Are you on that same train?
I'm definitely on the same train. If Jaden McDaniels is untouchable for a 37-year-old Kevin Durant, I don't know why Jaden McDaniels wouldn't still be untouchable for Darius Garland. So I think that situation is very unlikely. And the one caveat that I will say to your point is not necessarily trading for an injured player. Tim Conley still did pull the trigger on Julius Randle, who was out from February until the end of last season. So
true.
I know in that situation, it's a lot different because you got Dante DiVincenzo, who came off the best year of his career, who at the time was his shooting season. He made it was like the 12th most threes in NBA history, something like that. So there was definitely a perk into that, but I'm with you. I don't necessarily see us going out, getting a Darius Garland. I've talked about this before. Rob Dillingham and Darius Garland were almost exactly the same player coming in. Sure, Darius was a little bit more polished, had a little bit of a cleaner jumper, but they were the same weight and damn near the same height. So I think what Tim Conley's vision with Rob Dillingham is, if he can figure out the turnovers, he's going to have a Darius Garland-like career trajectory. Maybe he's not going to be a 20-point-per-game scorer, but I very well think Rob, if he pans out, could be like an 18-7 kind of guy, because that's something that I was impressed with throughout Rob from summer league all the way till the end of the season. Sure, the dude makes some pretty shitty decisions from time to time, but when they work, dude, that man could pass the ball, dude. He's got a pretty solid IQ for only being 19 years old, and that's something that I think is going to continue. You know, you don't see many young guards come into the NBA and dominate right off rip, especially smaller guards. Like, I think Trae Young might be one of the only exceptions to that. Look at Jalen Brunson. It took him getting traded to the Knicks to really break out to get to that superstar level. Steph Curry, it took him ankle problems and getting talked on the trade block. He didn't pan out for a few years. Darius Garland. Sure, Darius kind of figured it out after a year or two, but my point is young guards take longer to develop. Playing point guard in the NBA is like playing quarterback in the NFL. You're the distributor. You're setting everything up. You know, it's one of the harder things to learn, and it's not just something that you learn overnight. So that's something that fans got to remember when you hear that Rob's this, Rob's that. I think after this season, if Rob plays and the turnovers are still very high, then we can start to have some discussions about what we're going to do with Rob. But for the time being, I'm fully in on Rob Dillingham. I don't want him moved. Continue to learn from Mike Conley. If you can go get somebody else and maybe chop Mike Conley's minutes down to 10, 12 minutes a game, I would even be cool with that. But yeah, kind of moving on from free agent talk. Do you want to get onto some draft prospects real quick?
Yeah,
just while we still got some time left in the show.
Let's
All
do it,
right.
man. Let's do it.
So I saw a lot of you guys talking here about one of these guys, Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert, needs to be moved. So I think realistically, bringing this back into the free agent stuff a little bit as well too, I think that what's going to happen is, Takashi, I've been seeing your comments. I think that we draft a big this year, whether it's a small ball 5 or a true 5. I'm not too sure. You know, Tim Conley has a reputation of picking athletic guys. So a guy that I have on my draft board, Thomas Sorber, he's a solid athlete. He's longer, but he's not great above the rim, right? So the guy that I have highest on my draft board at 17, and somebody who I didn't necessarily do a ton of research in until over these last 3 to 4 days, is Mr. Rasheer Fleming from St. Joseph's. He's a 6'9" power forward, 240 pounds, 20 years old, soon to be 21. So he was in his junior season. But the thing with Rasheer Fleming, he's got a 7'5" wingspan, right? So Rasheer Fleming has that Jaden McDaniels, Kevin Durant type of build. In his junior year at St. Joseph's, he averaged about 15 points a game, 8.5 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 1.3 steals a game, and 1.5 blocks per game. So almost at 3 stocks per game. That is beyond serviceable. And then the kicker with that is his defensive versatility is through the roof. Thomas Sorber, Rasheer Fleming is probably the most versatile defender in the whole draft. And I was shocked to see that. He was in the 98th percentile for individual defensive rating. And he can switch on to centers. He can switch on to wings. He can switch on to guards too, dude. Like, it almost gives you like a more athletic, quicker lateral quickness version of Naz Reid, you know? And then the thing that I also look at, Rasheer Fleming is an elite shooter, and he didn't shoot a low volume of threes either. Last year, he shot 39% from 3 on 4.5 attempts per game. So the dude's elite, like flat out. He's one of those guys that I kind of look at like a Jalen Williams. Jalen Williams came out of Santa Clara. People kind of looked at Sam Presti and were like, all right, you know, that might be a reach, you know? J-Dub is currently the second on a team playing in the NBA Finals.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Just because they go to a smaller school does not mean the talent's not there, you know? And that's just what I see with Rasheer Fleming. The dude is also just a microwave scorer. He scored 20 plus points in 6 games this year. Not all 6. 5 out of those 6 games, he shot over 60% from the field. The one game that he missed, he shot 58% from the field. So this dude is one of those microwave scorers. When he's on, he's on. And I guess like the few weaknesses that I saw in Rasheer Fleming's game were that he's not necessarily the best shot creator, right? But I feel like when you have a team, or when you're on a team with Anthony Edwards and with Julius Randle, those two have the ball a lot. They're pretty ball dominant. Julius, you run the offense through him and he kind of just kicks it out. Rasheer Fleming on catch and shoot threes last year shot 44%. So it'd be a good fit. Rasheer Fleming is great in the pick and roll. He's great in the pick and pop. What's something that, you know, the Wolves, we run a lot. We run the pick and roll, a high pick and roll with Rudy. Imagine what a Rasheer Fleming like player could do. Like, obviously, I'm kind of talking crazy and thinking long term here, but
No, I like it.
Say Rasheer Fleming pans out and we take him 4 years down the line. Rasheer Fleming setting Ant screens like 10 feet above the basket. He's quick. He can pop. He can roll. I feel like that adds just such a different dimension than what Rudy Gobert brings you. And I guess on that topic, if it's not Rasheer Fleming, I'd like to see us get a stretch 5. I think that would benefit our offense a bunch just because of how we like to start it in our sets. You get the high Ant pick and roll or the pick and pop to Rudy handing it off, give it back to Ant, however you must. But yeah, back onto Rasheer Fleming. Sorry about that. He wasn't necessarily the best shot creator. He loses his handle a little bit too. He's not necessarily as fluid with the ball, but I think that's something that can be coached up, not necessarily within a season, but that's something you can learn over time. You can kind of just get relegated to the corner if you must, air quotes for those listening on Spotify, and just have him be a catch and shoot player. And he also still does kind of have to develop that mid-range game, but from inside the paint and shooting outside the arc, the dude is a freak, right? In college too, he didn't necessarily get a ton of transition looks, which I feel like would be fine with the way that the Wolves run offense. And like I said, he's a quick, athletic, lanky guy.
Yeah.
I don't worry about him in transition if you're going to take him. When you have players that are polarizing like Jaden, who's an athletic freak, Naz Reid, Anthony Edwards, you're going to be all right. So all in all, Rasheer Fleming to me could very well be a third, maybe even a second option on a championship team if he pans out. Kind of what he reminds me of is a Mikal Bridges type of player or an OG Anunoby. So you're that elite wing defender who can switch 1 through 4. In Rasheer Fleming's case, ideally 2 through 5, right? You can step up, you can knock down a 3, you just show up when the team needs you the most. So I think that is my most ideal draft prospect. I'm one of those people that likes to look at upside versus what they can bring you now. And I know it kind of contradicts what I said earlier because he is 20 years old coming on 21. But Rasheer is one of those weird players. He's still kind of raw, but you kind of know what you're going to get, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's a gamble at the end of the day because you're either going to get the elite production and elite shot making, or you're just not, you know? Like the plug and play is not going to work and you're going to be like, well, shoot. So that's my number one player that I'd like on my draft board at 17 is Rasheer Fleming if he's available.
I like that. I like Rasheer Fleming a lot, man. I think for those people listening, if you don't know who he is or have not watched it,
just watch some tape.
Just go watch film. Just go watch film on Rasheer Fleming, and then that alone should sell you. Not even what Matt's saying. I think that film will. You'll know what I mean when you watch his film session, man. It's impressive to see what he's doing, and like you said, he just does a lot of things so well already that even if the scoring is okay, I think he just fits with what Minnesota needs. At pick 17, guys, you're looking for not like a star level player, but you're looking for like a starter level player. Rotational level player. Remember that. We're not going big star hunting here. We're looking at somebody who can fit in to a winning team in the future and contribute and do a lot of the small intangibles and different things. But yeah, moving on. I think another guy we got here, Cedric Coward. He's another guy. Go look at the tape on him. Cedric Coward is kind of reminds me, you mentioned it earlier, man, Jalen Williams. He kind of gives me Jalen Williams vibes. Smaller school as well, but I just get this kind of all around just this untapped potential with him. He's a lot riskier of a pick than Rasheed Fleming, in my opinion, because he could easily kind of bust. But I just feel like he does a lot of things so well. He can defend. He's amazing in the transition. He can. He's a terror in the transition. He'll steal the ball. He has great anticipation on stealing passes, and I think he's just so quick and electric, man. He's a really fun player. If you go look up a tape on him, 18 points a game for him last year, 7 rebounds, nearly 4 assists. So kind of all around do-it-yourself player. Again, this reminds me so much of Jalen Williams coming out of Santa Clara. 1.7 blocks per game as well. Good size too with this guy. He's a 6'6", 7'2" wingspan, 213 pounds. So not a small player by any means. He's not your big. So I do think Minnesota is going to probably go after a big man. I agree on that if they were going to draft. But if you're going with an athletic guy, and let's say you're taking somebody who, again, we said this before, Tim always takes people who we don't expect. He's somebody that I could see Minnesota going after just because I think he fits in with any playoff team. He kind of does everything. There is an upside again. And I think Cedric Coward is a guy that, again, it would be a big win for the Timberwolves. He's a good shooter as well. He can do a lot of the other things, man, but that's somebody I have high on my board. Who else you got on your board, Matt?
I kind of mentioned the name earlier, Thomas Sorber. He's definitely a name that I would look at. 6'10", 265-pound center from Georgetown. Averaged 14.5 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, and is similar to Rasheed Fleming. Great on the defensive end. 2 blocks a game, 1.5 steals a game as a 19-year-old freshman. So that's the difference between Sorber and Fleming. Is Thomas Sorber is just a lot younger, right? But the big thing with Thomas Sorber that I think knocked him down the draft boards was the season-ending foot surgery that he had, ankle surgery, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem when you're a big in the NBA. And now let me say this, because some people on the internet like to take this stuff in the worst way possible. I'm not comparing this dude to these guys, but you look at Shaquille O'Neal, you look at Yao Ming, you look at Joel Embiid, ongoing issues with the same injury, right?
Yep.
So that is just something to keep in the back of your head with Thomas Sorber. But if he can shake that, I think Thomas Sorber would be great. He's got great interior touch around the rim. He's actually a really good passer for being a center. I think you could kind of treat him as like a Julius role. You could run him in the high post. He can distribute. Whether that clicks early in his NBA career, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that would be the goal down the line. He's like a Rudy Gobert type of player. He's a good drop coverage, so he's kind of like that floater, just how Rudy plays. And I think this is probably our most realistic draft target, or that I have on my board. You don't trade Rudy this season. You ride it out. You have him mentor Thomas Sorber or whatever young guy we take, kind of show him the range, show him how the NBA works. And from there, if you like him, if you're confident, ship Rudy off possibly next season. So that's kind of what I think about. The thing with Thomas Sorber that does worry me just a little bit, like I said, outside of the foot injury, is he relies a lot on his recovery speed and just being like a longer, lankier guy. So he's not necessarily, he doesn't have the lateral quickness of like a Naz Reid. He doesn't have the lateral quickness of a Rasheed Fleming, like I mentioned earlier. So that is something that worries me a little bit. He's not necessarily great at catching lobs. He doesn't have upwards athleticism. It's just recovery because he's long. He that's what he can do. The dude doesn't have a 3-point shot. He shot 16% in college, and he wasn't like consistently taking threes, but it's like when the look was there, he was taking it. So you got to cut the threes out, or you got to figure that jumper out. And I would assume if you do get drafted, you're going to get asked to cut the threes, right? So I don't think that's necessarily a big worry, but the way I kind of look at him is kind of like a Jonas Valanciunas, but a better defender, and not necessarily as stocky, just a little bit more athletic than he is, a younger version of Jonas. So that's kind of what I got on Thomas Sorber. I don't have nearly enough as I do about Rasheed Fleming, but he's just one of those guys that he's young. You bank on the upside. You bank that he doesn't get hurt again, and say he doesn't, it's a home run pick. But I don't necessarily know if we are in the position to gamble on a young player with an injury. So that's my only caveat to the Thomas Sorber pick.
Real quick, if Minnesota was to trade up to a player, I think that's what they would need to do to acquire a guy like Derek Queen. How do you
Yes,
feel about
sir.
Derek Queen? Because I know there's got to be some people in here who like Derek Queen at 16.5 points per game and 9 rebounds last year. What do you like about Derek Queen's game, and why should people watching right now have Derek Queen on their NBA big board for the Wolves?
Well, if you guys watched any of the tournament last year, sure, if you probably saw it, Derek Queen traveled on his last shot, but we're not going to talk about that. The dude's made for the moment. He shows up. He's young. He's got the potential. He's another one of those big guys who's a really good passer. If that 3-point shot comes around, that dude is going to be a problem. Because right now he's not Thomas Sorber level bad, but he's not a Rasheer Fleming shoot the lights out kind of guy. I don't have the exact number, but if I had to take a guess off the top of my head, he's probably like upper 20s, mid 20s in terms of 3-point percentage. And I think that is something that you'd want to explore for whatever NBA team drafts him. If it's the Wolves, if it's not, you want to figure out how you can develop that 3-point shot with Derek Queen. Young guy, big body. He can get his own. He chases the glass. He's a solid defender. He's just another one of those guys that is like Thomas Sorber. He just doesn't have the injury problems. And like I said earlier, had Thomas Sorber not had the injury problems, I think him and Derek Queen, we look at them as very similar prospects.
Yep.
I think we look at them going anywhere from the 8 to 15 range realistically. So that's kind of the only way that I see us getting a Derek Queen. If for some reason he slips past Toronto, if he slips past the Bulls, because they need a center, they're probably going to trade Vooch. If that happens, I think that, yes, if you're Minnesota, you try to move up if you can, but it's not something that I think is very likely. It'd just be something cool, something that would just be cool to happen. But that's kind of what I got to say about Derek Queen. I don't have a ton of stuff in my notes right here, but again, another one of those players. Go watch the film on him, and you'll see the potential that Derek Queen has.
There's a lot of guys coming up in the draft. We got more guys that we probably will post videos about, or maybe some of the guys diving into more depth coming out here in the next couple days with the Daily Wolves here. If you don't already, we're on Instagram, TikTok. You can see it on your screen there. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast platforms. That's the Daily Wolves. Just search it on there. This is the Daily Wolves Courtside. Again, we're going to be bringing you everything with the NBA draft, trade rumors, anything we're hearing. We're going to pump it out for you guys. We appreciate everyone tuning into this longer extended emergency podcast episode. Until next time, guys, as always, go Wolves.